Hello and welcome everyone to our mob programming gathering. I'm Nancy Van Schoenderwert. I'm an Agile coach at Lean Agile Partners, and I'll be your moderator today. This event is put on by Agile New England. We're an ACM chapter, and we're also the largest Agile user group in the Boston area. Agile New England has been hosting a conference fully dedicated to mob programming since 2016. I've been involved in leading that conference, the volunteer team, and Woody Zool helps us with the program, and we have many other volunteers involved with it as well. We'll say some more about that a little bit later. We've also put on another online gathering event a few months ago in June. That video should be on our website. Well, it is on our website, and you might want to check that out too. I was really pleased to see that the comments from some of our attendees who said that even though they were brand new to mob programming and had no idea what it was, that the program we had at that time gave them a really good idea of what it's like to work this way. So that was nice. Today, we have three speakers who have huge depth of experience that I'm really anxious to share with you all. Let's see. But before I get into that, let me just say one thing too. This event is for all levels of experience, all types of roles, even if you've never heard of mob programming before. So let me give a very brief definition. Woody Zool likes to say that mob programming is a technique for getting all the brilliant minds working together on the same thing, at the same time, in the same space, on the same computer. Well, that brings us right around to our theme for today, because in the same space and at the same computer can be a little difficult if you've been suddenly forced to work remote now, whether or not you've been doing mob programming. So our theme is remote mob programming. How do we do it? Here's how we'll spend our time together today. I have some brief opening remarks right now. Then we'll have our speakers each in turn, Emily Bache, Mike Roberts, and Lauren Carr. And I have some very brief announcements at the end. We also have some ground rules to help us maximize the benefit that we all get from our time together. First of all, we're going to be using questions from the dialog box in Zoom. We're not going to use the hand raise feature. Our chat is open and monitored. We have two chat monitor volunteers, Danny and Peter, and I hope they're saying hello in the chat window. And we've also got David doing our Zoom host work and Ethan helping with questions. You'll see on the right-hand side of our screen, there's also a link, and that's our code of conduct. We also want everybody to feel totally welcome and comfortable at our event here. So our code of conduct is there on our mobprogrammingnewengland.org website. There's a link to it. The text of it is right here. Everybody who is registered has already received this and had a chance to read it, so I'm not going to read the whole thing, but you can check it out. And just a couple more reminders before we get going. Each talk will be 25 minutes long. Within that section of time, there's a period for Q&A at the end. I'll ask the speakers to just let me know, just say when you're ready for questions, and I'll start to pull up the questions that people have submitted. You can submit your questions anonymously if you like. Nobody will know who they came from. Or you can add your name too. I'll just use first names if I read any names. All the questions are going to be saved. In a format like this, there's always more questions than we can get to. So we'll save them and we'll forward them to our speakers. They may blog about that in future or something like that. There will also be a way to carry on some more dialogue. I'll say more about that at the end of our program. A recording of this video is going to be available after our session, of course. It should only take a day, maybe two, for us to have that up on our website. You can save the chat log, or you can request it from mobprogramming@agilenewengland.org email address if you forget to. And at this point, I'll ask everyone to please mute their audio, and I'll ask our speakers to turn their video on, because now here's the fun part, introducing our speakers. What we're going to do is a brief little self-intro by each person in turn before we start the first talk. And each speaker will say a little bit about their own background and interests, and give you a little bit of a preview of their topic. So without anything further, I'm going to just take it in turn. Emily Bache first, then Mike Roberts, then Lauren Carr. So go ahead, Emily. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be invited to this event. So my name is Emily. I'm a technical agile coach with a company called Pro Agile. I live in Sweden, grew up in the UK, and I have been doing this remote ensemble programming for some time, a lot more in the last 6 months or so because of COVID. And I'm looking forward to telling you about how I'm using this as a forum for technical coaching.
Thanks. Mike?
Hey there, my name is Mike Roberts. I am a software engineer by trade. I've been coding for about 32 years. And I now run a software apprenticeship where we teach folks how to become software engineers and be successful on the job. And we get them paid to do that training. So I think that's awesome. I'm going to talk a little bit about why we've embraced mob programming and some of the caveats that we've run into, and maybe make some recommendations that might be helpful.
Thank you. Lauren, you're up.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Lauren Carr. It's super great to be here. I'm super excited for today. I am a software engineer at Hunter Industries for the past 2 years now. And I've been doing remote since about March. So what is that, like 8-9 months now? Seems like it's flown by. And I'm going to be talking today about how we took our mobbing system remote and are treating it as one large experiment.
Thank you. All right. And Hunter, that's where mob programming first got started. Okay. So I'm going to do my intro slide here for Emily. And you've just heard her introduction. So without anything further, I'll invite Emily to begin her slide sharing now and begin her talk.
Okay. Okay, let me just sort out my, my screen. Okay, so I hope now that my slides are visible.
Good.
Yep, great. So I want to tell you about what I've been doing with remote ensemble programming, which is just the way I'd like to describe remote mob programming. I prefer the word ensemble. I think it's a little bit more friendly, but it's basically the same thing. So the reason I became interested in this is basically, for looking back in my background, I've been worrying for a number of years about how to get people to learn test-driven development and other agile technical practices. And the basic answer is, of course, people learn things through being taught them and by practicing them. So that's kind of where I'm coming from with this topic. I want to put my angle on it is that I'm trying to help people to learn technical practices. And I wrote this book, it's about 10 years ago now, and it's called the Coding DOJO Handbook. And this is about how you can practice on code katas in a group. You go to this dojo where you get together with some other people and you practice code katas. And this is kind of what it looks like. And my vision with this was that you would get together like with your team at work, maybe one afternoon every iteration or every month or something. Or maybe you get together in an evening and you'd spend some time doing this practice and you'd learn test-driven development. And that was really fun. And I wrote this book about it and lots of exercises you can do and fun games and stuff. And I did a lot of this and it was good. I have to say not a lot of it was remote. But then after a while, I began to realize that there is a gap between these exercises that you do in these coding dojos and the production code that you normally work on. And some people manage to bridge that gap and some people don't. And it was bothering me. So that was kind of where I was. So I've got this picture of the gap. It's like the difference between practicing on a nice smooth slope, like I've got here on the right, nice freshly groomed piste where I can practice my new techniques, and stuff I'm just learning, compared with the production code, which is like the picture on the other side with all the bumps all over the piece. It's the same activity, you're still, you know, skiing or coding, but suddenly in the production code, doing something like test-driven development, when you're a little bit unsure about it, and suddenly your production code, it's all like there's loads of people doing other stuff in it, and it's bumpy, it's difficult to get started with the test-driven development. So I was kind of thinking about this, and well, how can we be better at helping people to learn these skills, because I see such a benefit to being able to do TDD and other agile technical practices. So what I've been doing more recently is this technical agile coaching. And the basic formula is you have 1 hour of learning, practicing on exercises, 2 hours of this ensemble programming in the team, and you do this for 10 days of coaching a time. And so for an individual team, that would mean spending basically half a day on the coaching for 10 days. There's a link there, which I'm hoping someone will put in the chat, which is a blog post I wrote a couple of years ago now, when I first discovered this coaching technique. I learned it from a friend of mine, Llewellyn Falco. And since then, I've been finding customers where I live in Sweden and coaching teams and learning to do this. And kind of, you know, making it my own style of coaching. So let me explain a little more about what this is. The learning hour, that's like a really short coding dojo. We're just doing it with one team with the organization I'm coaching. And we do this every coaching day, and it's just 1 hour. So during this, we're doing code kata exercises. It's quite structured. I've actually, a lot more structured actually than a coding dojo would have been when I used to do those. Now I'm doing it remotely. So it kind of mid-March, suddenly all of this just went remote. And the client I was working with was sent everyone home. So suddenly it's all happening over the corporate Teams and Microsoft Teams. So to make this work, I've got a bit more freedom in these learning hour sessions because we're doing exercises. So I can choose my own tools to some extent. So I've got this shared online document, which we use like as a whiteboard during these learning hour sessions. So I can share notes about the exercises, and we can all type in what our thoughts are. So this example screenshot here is where I've asked them to write down what are 5 important things to remember when you're doing test-driven development. And everyone has just been in and edited the document. And I think I've probably got 6 team members here, which is why I've got 6 answers. So that's a useful thing to do. So we do a bit of that kind of shared whiteboard, and then we spend some time doing exercises. And I've been using Cyber Dojo, which is an online practicing environment, which is really useful. It's the way we've been doing it is that I prepare it and share a URL for the Cyber Dojo that we're all in together. And then whoever's typing is typing into their browser, writing the code. And then when the ping goes off for rotate, after 3 or 4 minutes, I get them to press the test button, which sends all the files to the server. The next person comes in, refreshes their browser, and then they can start typing. Oh, and they share their screen. So that's been working really smoothly, actually, with Cyber Dojo doing a code kata. The only thing that is less good with Cyber Dojo is when you want to do a refactoring kata with the group. So for that, I've been using VNC. So I set up a machine in the cloud on EC2, and I set up that with a nice IDE, CLion if we're doing C++, for example, and everyone connects to that with VNC using a VNC viewer, and then switching typists is really easy. It's just, we just have to agree over the video chat who's got the mouse, basically. The biggest problem is people forget that they've got the VNC window in focus, and they like change windows or type things when they don't intend to. But it's fine if everyone's paying attention. It works really well, actually. So that's kind of for the exercises that we're doing, an hour a day just practicing. But then as I mentioned before, the other part of the coaching is the ensemble programming in their production code. And this is where I'm coaching them actively in helping them to learn these skills and apply them in the production code, you know, on the bumpy slope with all the people on it. So that's where I'm helping them with this. So I'm sure you know what ensemble programming is, mob programming. It's this structured collaboration we're all coding together. And as the coach, I'm there to encourage the team to use good practices, technical agile practices. So I joined the ensemble, and my role is, I've put here that I'm doing coach, facilitate, mentor, and teach, and for the whole team. So exactly what I do, I shift between these roles of you know, teach, well, I might say, okay, hold it a minute, let me just explain this concept. We're about to do using a mock, you know, maybe I'll even bring out some slides. Or maybe I'll be mentoring and saying, okay, you've used this before in the learning hour. We're going to do this now. And if you get stuck, I'm going to be able to prompt you and mentor you and make sure you're able to do this in your production code. And facilitate, that's more about managing the rotations, making sure we know who's typing, and that the discussion stays on track, and the mob or the ensemble has a direction. So this is all the parts of the coaching that I'm doing. So the reason I find that ensemble programming is such a good thing to be doing as a coach, it's that I was going to list 3 reasons basically why I find this is a really good thing to do with a team for this context. So when you're working in the ensemble, everyone has to understand the code. Everyone has to feel ownership of the code because you're all writing it together. And the team has to learn to make design decisions together. They have to learn to collaborate. And it means that they also have to feel that at the end of the ensemble session, if they're going to then split up and work individually, any one of them could pick up that code and go from there. You know, so everyone feels an equal ability to work with that code afterwards. So as a coach, this is really helpful position to have a team in, with the code we're working on together. I also find that it's really very easy to transfer skills between people in the ensemble. So if you've got somebody there who knows how to do a thing, and the mob or the ensemble needs that thing, then soon everyone is going to know that. So I've got this speech bubble here with the navigator saying, I want you to configure Kubernetes and open this YAML file. And maybe they're the only person there who actually knows this. And so they explain it in words, and then the typist is typing in that stuff to the YAML file, and everyone in the ensemble then hears it, they see it, and they can ask questions. And at the end of the ensemble, we always hold a short retrospective where we reflect on what happens, and I get people to actually write down observations, and if they've learned something, they'll have to put that into words at the end, which makes it more likely they'll remember that thing. So as a coach, the spreading skills between team members is a really important aspect of this. And then the thing with having a visitor in an ensemble. If you've got an ensemble that knows how to work together and is doing well, and somebody joins them from outside, that person very quickly can start to contribute their expertise. They don't actually need to know everything about the programming language or the tools or the framework or the particular domain. After only I don't know, my experience, it takes I wouldn't say maybe minutes, but a very short time, tens of minutes, maybe an hour or so, more, something like that. You can start to contribute, first in a small way, but afterwards, after a while, you start to actually be able to contribute your expertise. So this is why I want, as a coach, them to be good at being an ensemble, because then they can accept help from visitors as well. And I am the visitor, of course, at first, and I want to contribute what I can to the ensemble. So the first thing I really need to do when I join a new team is I need to teach them ensemble skills, explain to them what they're supposed to do in the different roles of the typist and the navigator, explain how to do the rotations. I'm making sure that even the quieter voices are coming forwards and learning these skills as well, and making sure that they do the retrospectives, because that's an essential part. So So this is kind of why I'm using the ensemble as part of the coaching. And first I have to teach it. Okay, so then I was going to say something about going remote with this. When we suddenly went remote in March, I had to find a way to make this work. And we found that in order to switch typist, we needed to switch the machine that we had the code on, because their machine, they were behind their corporate environments. They weren't allowed to, you know, put their code on some shared VNC machine that I was in control of, obviously. So we had to use their coding tools. And they had, of course, Git to share code between developers. And they're using a tool called Gerrit, which unfortunately really slows down the push-pull thing. It takes ages after someone pushes before anyone else can pull it. So what I did was, with a 2-hour ensemble programming session, we had one typist for the first half, and then in the 5-minute break in the middle of the session, just before the break, they would push. And then at the end of the 5-minute break, when we all came back, the next typist would then pull. So we would only have 2 typists in a 2-hour session, but we would be rotating the navigator much more frequently than that to keep everyone engaged and involved. But then with another team, they discovered that they were able to use Visual Studio Code Live Share. So we've just started using that like this week. So that's like a revelation. Now we can suddenly switch typists really quickly. So I'm going to see if more of the teams can use this, but at the moment it's just one team. So that's kind of what we've been doing in the production code. And I have to say, actually, with the rotation, the way I've been doing it mostly is not on a timer when I'm in the production code. I find I try to do it task-based, so that when they've completed a goal, then we'll switch the navigator. And if the navigator is struggling with a goal, of course, I'm trying to help them to complete it, but sometimes we'll switch navigator to somebody who volunteers. So that's a bit about what we're doing with the remote mob programming. And then I've got this slide, which is just basically summarizing what I've said about the way I'm using this as a technical coach to help people to learn technical skills on exercises, you know, these smooth slopes where it's all freshly groomed pieced, and we can be really successful with all these skills and refactoring in TDD. And then I'm also coaching them in the production code where it's bumpy and there's lots of people in the way, and helping them to get over this gap between the code kata and the production code, and to be able to actually be successful with this stuff in their real environment. So that's kind of what I prepared to say, and I'm hoping that some people have got some questions.
Oh, they certainly have, Emily. I've got a good question here from Dimitri, and he's got a group of people that have been practicing katas. The other people are much more experienced programmers than he is, and he says they usually spend a tremendous amount of time discussing the pros and cons of possible approaches instead of writing code. It is for hours. From my perspective, I would prefer to see us writing more code. So his question, is it normal to spend more time on discussions than on writing code when you're doing katas? And is there something he can do to make the process more productive?
Right, I recognize what you're saying. I mean, if you put a bunch of software developers in a room and give them a design problem, there'll be like 10 different opinions about what to do, even if there's only like 6 people. So you have to, it helps to have somebody actively facilitating that and reminding the group that let's have a bias towards action. That's one of the rules you can say, or principles, I don't know, in rules of engagement, we have a bias to action, a bias to writing code. And try and get whoever is nominated as the navigator to just make a decision and do something. And if after the next navigator comes up, they want to change that decision, rip it up and do something else entirely, try and ask them to persevere at least until you can see whether this approach is even vaguely viable. I mean, don't just abandon it with the next navigator. And then hopefully when you've got some code up there, you're in a much better place then to actually start discussing again. So I normally try and ask people, whoever's navigating decides. The next navigator tries to pick up where they left off and carry on. And if they really can't, then okay, maybe we can discuss what was going to happen. But yeah, that's kind of the strategies I'm looking at. So bias to action, the navigator decides, discuss when you can see the code.
Okay, we have time if we can answer it very briefly for one further question. Bob asks, have you ever encountered technical challenges with VNC, perhaps different keyboards or OS?
Yeah, I mean, it's not completely perfect. The server I've got on EC2 is running Linux, and anyone who's used to a Mac will, the control key's in the wrong place, the alt key's in the wrong place, that kind of thing. But, you know, I find that when you've got a really good IDE there, it's, you know, you work it out and you manage, and it's worth the, I think it's worth the really quick switch of typist. I know you can do it with a Git push pull and everyone using their own machines, but having tried that, I really like the quick typist change and the lack of needing to rearrange windows every time we change typists.
Okay, well, okay, we're at time, so I just want to say thanks, Emily, and this is the only part of doing these things on Zoom that I really miss. We can't hear all the applause. So
right, are you sure, Nancy? Because I thought I had 25 minutes.
We're at, let's see, I'm at 12. Oh, I'm sorry. I think I got my timing wrong. Wow, I can do more questions. We don't have to go back. All right, thank you. You're ahead of me. Okay, let's come back to the questions then. Just a second, here I am. We got another one, and it says, let's see, from Russell. He says, what level of expertise do you generally find necessary for new mob programmers? Most of my team is unfamiliar with TDD, and several are new to IDEs. So what can you say about that?
Right, well, that sounds very typical. That's normal as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, that's, so he's asking for specific advice, I guess, about how to level up people, get people. So if you're doing exercises, code katas, do really easy ones to start with. Set them up for success by demoing what you want them to do, and then get them to do it. I mean, maybe it feels, I don't know. So that's something I do quite a lot. I will demo exactly what I want them to do, and then put them in the mob and get them to do it. And then I pick the next, so, and also grade the exercises. So I start with a really straightforward one, leap years, and then I go to a slightly harder one, fizz buzz, and then slightly harder one, and you know, and you lead them on through it until they can do it.
Okay, there's another question from Bob, and he says, do you at some point in the 10 days also educate about other roles like researcher or sponsor?
Ooh, I haven't really got to that so much. No, I guess I do. A researcher, yes. It's like, oh yeah, that's something about remote. Actually, I found that works well. You just say, oh, could somebody Google that, and then they paste into the chat while there's still a discussion going on. So when they found the result, they just paste stuff into the chat, and it doesn't disturb the discussion, and we can pick it up when we're ready for it. So yeah, that comes up. What was the other role you mentioned?
He also mentioned roles like researcher or sponsor.
Sponsor.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure what the sponsor role is, actually. I'm not familiar with that one.
Okay, I would assume that he's probably talking about like when the product owner might sit in and visit with the team.
Ah, right. Yeah, no, we haven't needed that so far. But yes, if we ever found that the organization I'm working with, yeah, the agileness of the requirements is not perhaps Yeah, it's quite detailed requirements. So far, the need to bring in the product owner hasn't come up so much, actually.
All right. Well, here's another question from Joel. And he asks, how do you sell management on, quote, tying up too many people on one task, unquote?
Oh, right. So, well, the thing is, I'm not selling them Ensemble Programming. I'm selling them technical coaching. So I talk a lot to managers about the value of quality and good unit tests and learning skills and training. And then I'm explaining that, well, the Ensemble Programming this is the forum I'm using to teach the skills. And I have to teach them Ensemble Programming before I can use it effectively as a forum for teaching them all this other skills. So that's not really the argument I'm driving with the managers that I'm speaking to.
Okay. Let's see, we have another question. This is anonymous. And this person says, I've been mobbing with a group of people working on algorithmic interview questions, for example, LeetCode, HackerRank. How can the mobbing procedure be altered to accommodate these kinds of questions that require deep individual thinking?
Oh, right. Now that's a very interesting idea to do really difficult problems in an ensemble. I mean, when you're tackling production code, that's a difficult problem often. But I haven't got experience of working with this specific problem she's talking about. I guess it's when I'm working on a difficult problem in the production code, which is the nearest thing I think I know about, it's always worth finding out, getting somebody to have really perhaps done a bit of research beforehand, not letting them take the typist role. The person who knows the most shouldn't take the typist role, because then their knowledge is not available to the group.
Makes sense.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm not really sure how to a good answer for that, I'm afraid.
Okay, here's another one from Neelis. He says, I'm curious, what do you do in the learning hour? What type of content do you bring to support the technical coaching?
So if you look on my GitHub, I've got a lot of exercises there. That's the kind of stuff I'm doing. I'm just writing a new book about the technical agile coaching that I'm doing. And I'm hoping it'll come out before the end of the year. And there's going to be some examples in there of very specifically what I do in the learning hour, how I structure it, and what exercises we're doing. So yeah, it's code katas, it's little exercises like the one on the screen here. What are 5 important things to remember? Yeah, get people to think about TDD, to practice it, yeah.
Okay, well, I think we've got time for, this one is a little bit meaty. It's from someone named Robert. He says, I've been mobbing remotely with my team for a couple of months now, and we all like it. My manager is not so convinced yet and is asking for quantitative advantages over qualitative ones. Now his issue is, he says, since we started by doing mobbing all the time, we don't have past experience to compare with. So he says, so we can't just say something like, we realize X time more tickets. So would you have any other suggestions for quantitative ways of expressing the advantages of mobbing to his manager?
That's a huge can of worms. If you haven't got any historical data, it's really hard to say that what's changed, I guess. You have to find some hard numbers that you have from before you started.
I usually try to go for defect rates with these kinds of questions.
Yeah,
because they're so expensive to repair, you know what I mean?
It's true. It's also a bit of a trailing metric. It's going to take a while before you see a movement on that.
Right. Okay.
But yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think now we're just about at time. Am I right?
Yes, I think so.
No, I have it correct. So I just want to say a big thanks to Emily, and now we can all applaud for what we're able to do. It's time for me to pull back the screen share now, if I can, let's see, get into here. And I'm supposed to come back to this. And I'm supposed to share. I don't know why it dropped. There we go. Screen share. So it's time to start with Mike. Mike, are you ready? And when you're ready to share your screen, and I'll just say a couple of words while Mike is doing that. Mike has been training people using mob programming, teaching coding, especially to underrepresented groups, underrepresented in the tech field. And I think that's just tremendous. So whenever you're ready to do the screen share.
Yeah. Are you able to see my screen?
Yeah, there we go.
Wonderful. So I'm going to talk a little bit, I hope, about how our teams of apprentices effectively use mob programming and how we use it as a tool to learn together. I want to share my experience as an instructor, talk a little bit about the student experience for those that haven't had the opportunity to test this out, and how we've made some adjustments due to COVID. So we'll just jump right in. How we started. So I've highlighted the we because I don't think this is necessarily how this might work for you, but maybe it helps. And I think it's very important to address that there's no one prescribed solution that I think is going to work everywhere. We heard about this crazy concept of mob programming about, say, 5 years ago. And it was because of that, we decided we should at least talk about it in our curriculum. So if any of our students encounter it out in the wild, they're not completely surprised by the concept or confused. So we had talked about pair programming primarily, and then we just started inserting, here's a footnote. And obviously we would give sort of a, only example we had at the time was where Lauren is at. So we would show a small video from Hunter and say, this is what you might be doing. So be prepared. Then we inserted it into the curriculum because we wanted to run an experiment and see, could we get them to spend a little bit more time at the end of the day coding? Could we create some mechanism by which we could incentivize them to stay a little bit longer? Because a lot of the way we focus on teaching is meeting people where they are and providing opportunities for them to intrinsically want to spend more time coding, because we know the more time they spend coding, the better they're going to get. So what we found right away was really positive experiences. And so we then began sort of iterating on that and figuring out how could we ingest it, how could we turn up what was working and create more opportunities for it to have a positive impact. So we've seen a lot of experience with this. We've seen experience with pairing not going as well as 3 in a mob. 3 we found is sort of the optimal size. And then one of the quotes that I have from my former CEO is that not only are they learning, but they feel like they're learning. It can be really, really challenging as a brand new software engineer, especially in an immersive environment where they're trying to rapidly upskill to learn the skill of software engineering. And so while it mostly feels brutal and painful, mobbing does not feel that way. And so we know that it is both something that works and something that does not feel nearly as painful. And so we try and do it as much as we can. So this is one implementation that you'd see. Fast forward a few years later, I had more people that were in the space, folks that were running dojos. A CTO that I used to work for, Matt Ferguson, brought this into Zito, company that I used to work for as a senior engineer. And so as we started seeing more folks adopting it, we thought, wow, this is something that we now can see more out in the wild and we can adopt some of their practices. And our lens is always about having all the right people for learning to take place. So not necessarily the right people for getting a task done, because we would give them tasks to work on. And then we would just sort of, as coaches and instructors, guide the process along. And so in this picture, I want you to think, as you kind of survey all the folks here, who's the instructor and where's the instructor at? And so I'll give you a moment to kind of, glance around. And the instructor in this case is the guy in the top right-hand corner wearing the shorts and the tan top. And notice he's at the back of the mob. So he can kind of observe the pattern. He can see how they're communicating. And he sort of floats around. There's actually one more team that's out of picture over towards the right that he's responsible for. And I'm in a whole nother room dealing with about another 15 or so individuals as we kind of all have them working on this project. We typically started in the earlier part of the day. So this is about a 4 or 5 hour session. We start with them getting a brief on the project we want them to build or what we've been working on. And we sort of just continue to work on something week over week. We would do this exercise about once a week initially. So it wasn't fully baked into our curriculum. But we identified that because there's this transient nature, we only have them for a short while, we wanted to maximize the experience and give them an opportunity to learn how do you destructure and break a project down and plan for the work that you're going to do. So you do that for about an hour or so, and then you break them into teams and have them decide how do they want to implement the solution, and again, do some planning as a group, and then come back and they sort of pitch their design. And the instructors walk through their design and make sure that it's something that can actually be done and it's doable. And then we send them off to their mob stations and they work as teams to implement the features and see if they can actually get it to a good stopping point by 2 or 3 hours in. And then we will come back together as a group and they'll watch senior instructors take their code and hopefully be able to integrate it into a solution. So that was sort of the middle step. We went from having a small experiment where they worked on mob projects to a once a week experience to where we are today, which is that all of our apprentices work in 3-person teams in a mob programming pattern. And they basically utilize most of their time working together with 2 other individuals, 2 software developers and a QA. And so that brings us to sort of making some adjustments. We went from this in-person experience where it was highly, integrated. Everybody was getting a chance to have that tactile feeling of being on the keyboard and quickly switching and 6 or 7 minutes on the keyboard, to needing to plan for more like 30 minutes on the keyboard and plan for transitions that are going to take. In our case, we found that Git works well for our team to switch and not have people remoting into one workstation. But there are other cases, we have some teams where due to the constraints and the environments they're in, it does make more sense for them to remote into a single system and then basically just hand that off to different team members. So it really is making the adjustments based on the conditions, the factors at hand, the team, what's going to work best in the project. And so within an organization, one of the things I would say you should be always thinking about is flexibility. How can you ensure that you're providing the opportunity for the right application of the pattern to meet not only who you have on your team and their current skill set, but what's going to be efficient. So there were some questions about efficiency, and the only way you get to that is trying things, right? And so we coach a lot of the trying behavior, the mentality of being open to listening to other people's ideas, trying things. And if you want, as the next driver sits down, the navigator wants to just change things up, then we go in a different direction. But it's also very novel in our application because we're dealing with nearly everybody in the room, besides maybe 2 individuals, is very, very junior. So if our program is, let's say we had a 16-week program, we had cohorts where our students there were rolling cohorts where our student body was composed of people that were in the first week, the middle of the curriculum, and the end of the curriculum. So at any given time, the makeup of the classroom environment is such that there are people at all different skill levels. This was designed and intentional, and this was an iterative process, right? Over many years, we evolved to know that if we had balanced teams with skill sets that were a little different, it would be easier for people to become comfortable. It would be easier for them to rely on their classmates and trust that if they get stuck, there will be people there that can kind of nudge them in the right direction, that there are folks that can, on the team, when we form these mob teams, we try and balance them and sort of make sure there's an even distribution of experience so that we're not in a situation where we form a team where there's 5 people and it's all their first week and they've literally never used an IDE before. They have no idea what HTML is, right? So that's not nearly as productive as having the resources that it takes to have sort of a meaningful interaction and make sure they're making progress, right? Because it can be exceedingly difficult to be given even a simple problem like counting by 2 and not having anyone on your team that knows how to write a function, right? Or knows how to do iteration, right? So we got to at least seed the teams and then have instructors for when the whole team gets stuck. And even the person that's 16 weeks in just doesn't understand. And so In that case, the instructor, if you identify the team is stuck, might actually position themselves in a different place and move up closer to where the screen is and position themselves to kind of act as a, kind of think of it as a ride along, right? So I become the primary navigator and everyone else is riding along. But rather than it being just a sort of like infotainment where they're all watching and observing, I'm posing questions in a sort of a Socratic way. I'm asking them, okay, what do you guys think we should do next? Walk me through what your thought process is. Help me understand, and then I'll give you the code that you need to make that happen. And I'll tell the driver what they need to type, but where do we need to go to get to our goal? What is our goal? What are we trying to accomplish? And so again, making some of those adjustments, I think are much more important than the adjustments we had to make from a technical standpoint, right? Is evolving to make sure that we can still provide the right support in ways that, for example, when we use tools, we need to be able to move from room to room and quickly get an instructor in to be able to observe what's happening in each of the rooms. So for us, it's important to be able to make sure we can be jumping around and we don't necessarily have that role in the real world, right? So a Scrum Master might make the rounds once in the morning, but they're not constantly making the rounds all day long, if that makes sense. So a few things are just different as we implement this pattern. In terms of observations about the tooling, so I'll just generally say that while I don't think the tooling out there is great, I don't think anybody's really hit the nail on the head in terms of providing a comprehensive set of tools to do mob programming really well, or even collaborative programming really well, because I think the focus for a long time has been, you can pair, and if you want, there's kind of a good mechanism to pair, but not anything really beyond that is fully developed. So we're in a unique position because we can build or we can integrate things as, you know, as a software shop, right? We have students. We have this, you know, group of folks that have to work on something. So sometimes it's very meta, but we have them build tools while they're mobbing to help with mobbing. So we've had them build things like a random group generator so that when we start a session, everyone can type their name in and then we can randomly generate the teams and have them seated with how many weeks you've been in the course. And if we use that as a weighted metric, we can kind of balance the teams and make sure we don't have too many people that are in their first week. And so it took us a little while. It took us, I think, 5 or 6 4-hour sessions to come up with a working tool that we would be able to then use for every future session. So we used that for many years. In addition, we've had some failed experiments. We tried to build a better mob timer than the mob timer you see on the screen. And the reality is this one's actually pretty decent. So it took a long time to build something comparable in just another tech stack. And we weren't able to add a lot of real value to it. So we ended up just going back to using the one that's available that's just on GitHub. So the reason why I say that is because there are sometimes diminishing returns in trying to find better tools than the ones that just kind of work well enough for you to just deal with them, grit and bear it, and get through the process. So what we have found is the standard tools work. So we're big fans of Zoom. So I've listed that. I'm sure everybody's heard of Zoom at this point. So we've also found some that I used to love a tool called Screen Hero. Screen Hero was acquired by Slack, and they subsequently killed it. But then for some odd reason, they allowed the people that were acquired to rewrite the tool, and it's now called Screen SO. So it lives again. So if any of you have used Screen Hero in the past, it lives again. It's more of what you see in the example on the right, where you have multiple cursors inside of the shared session, and it makes it a little bit easier to collaborate, kind of like VS Code. It's not perfect, but it's getting better. And that experience of being able to have 4 or 5 cursors on the screen can be both distracting, but also a way for you to very quickly switch if you're not a VS Code Live Share fan. We've tried VS Code Live Share. The experience that we had with VS Code Live Share was it was difficult to save and move the file around from machine to machine. And it was also difficult to have the focus and know, well, should we be using VS Code and then using Zoom to watch the version of VS Code that someone is looking at? And so we haven't found a great combo. And it's just, again, been easier for folks to just use Zoom and just switch different desktops. But we're not constrained by actually having to produce output at any volume. We're constrained to just making the learning experience work. So if they don't get something done quickly, it's no problem. It's more like practice or an exercise. And so in production, you'd have to find, and I think you would find the right tool that each team feels would make them the most productive. So I've tried VS Code. I've tried Miro, I think, is great for the planning process that we do beforehand. So it's, again, just about experimenting with the different tool sets. So as Woody likes to say, most of our focus is turning up the good, right? Going painfully slow, which in an immersive boot camp seems odd because we're always trying to like rush, and we've got to learn this today so we can get ready for tomorrow. We sort of turned that on its head and said, why? What if people could just stay as long as they need to stay? And once we did that, it opened up the possibility for us to go at the pace that makes sense. If the teams don't get it done, that's okay. In the retrospective, we talk about what did you learn? What did you gain from the experience of getting to kind of learn together for a few hours? And it's very stressful for some people when they see it the first time, but nearly everyone the first time they do it as a student in their first week, they walk away saying, wow, I was surprised by how much I felt like that was like the best part of this week, that we got to finish up by me getting to kind of work with the team. And I felt like even though I didn't know much, I was still able to kind of follow and see what was going on. Doesn't work for everybody though. We also have people that hate it and it's terrible and they will complain and say, I can't contribute anything. I don't know what's going on. Or they'll walk away from the group and they'll walk away and they'll just say, they'll shut down. And so very quickly you can identify people that are personalities that are shutting down and then figure out how you address it. It's just not the right learning mode or learning style for them. And for some teams, it's not going to work. So because our students are also learning things like grit and determination, and we're in a sort of a environment where we're supposed to foster outcomes, we can force them and we can say, you guys have to do this activity. You have no choice. This is mandated by your experience. Or when we pay people, we hire them and we tell them you're going to be mobbing. And if it doesn't work for them, that's fine. But that means that this isn't the right experience for them. And so in a regular real world scenario, you probably have to be more flexible. Because if you're already not using mob, you need to figure out, is it worth making some tough decisions about who's the good fit for your team, right? So I would caution folks that are like, this sounds great, I'm going to force my developers to do this. Or the folks that say, my developers revolted the first week, which sometimes happens. It can be very, very draining mentally to spend your first week talking and staying focused on somebody else's time frame versus the way that you might normally work throughout your day in your normal up and down cadence of staying focused and relaxing, etc. So it takes some adjustments. We found that it helps them become super good at communicating, right? Become good at asking questions. It makes them exercise speaking technically. And so it helps a lot of the skills that you're trying to develop when someone's in the early phase of their career. So we try not to force anything, and we try and make sure that we adjust to the scenario or the technology and not have the reverse happen. So that's all I have for slides. I think now is maybe a good time to open up for some questions.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. I don't see questions in our list right now, but I would like to ask you a question, Mike.
Sure.
I see that I liked your emphasis, especially towards the end there, on that question about how some people just really, they start to shut down, as you put it. I've seen that too, sometimes when I coach teams, and I also never push it, or I encourage the managers not to add pressure because it's exactly the wrong thing to do. I've often seen people though who were found it too overwhelming at first. I've seen them come around to it, usually way faster than I expected. Has that been your experience too?
They can, but there definitely is there is a personality type that doesn't like the type of change and the rapid sort of like being in your own space where you get to control everything to having to sometimes advocate for your opinion. Because let's face it, I have to do a lot of coaching to say, hey, pause for just a second. That person said something. Did you guys all hear what they said? Let's have them say it again because it was super valuable. And you got to start teaching them better listening skills. You've got to kind of teach them, in some cases, to advocate better for themselves if they feel like they're not being listened to, or people aren't respecting their ideas or being rude, right?
Yeah.
So you do have a scenario in some cases where folks feel like there are microaggressions and there's a lack of clarity on what am I supposed to do? I don't understand because I haven't coded before. How am I supposed to be effective as a navigator? We have
Right.
to, assign roles sometimes and say, today we're going to have everybody navigating, but only one person gets to talk, because otherwise it gets super noisy sometimes. So we have to, employ a talking stick and like use different techniques based on kind of where people are. The comfort level in the folks that are just super uncomfortable, I think I'm a tough love kind of guy. I say I'm kind of like the Bobby Knight of coding instructors, tossing chairs around the classroom and basically saying, you better get used to it, because this is how it's going to be in the real world in terms of being uncomfortable. You're going to have to force yourself out of your comfort zone to be learning every day and to be resilient when people have an exchange of ideas and they don't like yours. So part of that, I think, is that conversation, which is a good conversation to have in a safe environment where folks can get something from it and not feel like they're being punished, or they're not being perceived as like following what they're supposed to do. So
yeah, I take your point too about some people just don't like that environment. I've worked with lots of people who were very wedded to the way they had their screen laid out. Do you know what I mean? And their tools set up. So I get that. Here's another one. Some questions have been rolling in. David says, maybe this is more of a comment. He says, keep in mind that your attempt to build a better mob timer likely also had the side effect of getting you to appreciate the existing tool more and thus experience less frustration with it.
Sure.
Okay.
It's also interesting that since we're a full stack JavaScript shop, JavaScript's not the right or the best language for like types and dates. So it's like a brutal exercise to give students this task.
Okay. And also, let's see, I think it's the same person. Asks this question: do you also teach professional engineers? I think roughly a third of the experienced engineers I've met would benefit from the skills you teach.
Absolutely. So we do have a small consulting practice. We go in and help organizations that are adopting agile processes and help them sort of work through what we're talking about today.
Okay. Here is, excuse me, here is a question that's came up for Emily, but maybe you'd like to take a stab at it.
Sure.
Wasim says, at my workplace, we have lots of experience with pair programming, but every time we attempted mob programming, it's been unsuccessful. The main complaint is lack of engagement from other than the navigator and typist. How do you improve engagement of the rest of the group?
So one is what I just described, that you could potentially, instead of leaving it open to all of the navigators, if you have multiple, is to rotate the navigator. And so you basically say, some of you are silent navigators and only one of you is talking. And it could, sometimes the easiest way to keep track of it is just, it's the next person up, or it's the person that was just in the driver's seat. And so they get to then be, that's kind of nice because you've been driving and you might have some thoughts. And so you might say, well, after you finish driving, you get to be the only navigator and everybody else is just observing. So it doesn't get everybody talking, but the other way is to walk away. I know one of the questions that came up before was about, if you have this difficult code kata that you're trying to solve, how do you solve that in a mob? Well, you don't at the workstation. You get up and you go to the whiteboard as a group. And as a group at the whiteboard, you work through and you talk about your thought process and you try and break it into visuals and you start using the right tool, which isn't always the computer. Sometimes it's, a piece of whiteboard paper or whatever the tool is. So.
Okay. I have another question here from Dimitri, and he asks, how do you explain the role of the navigator? Is it as an idea generator or as a transponder of ideas coming from the rest of the mob?
I like that. I don't like the transponder, the analogy of that as much as like being a conduit, or I guess it's hard because in my mind, so here in my brain, this is what I'm thinking. What I sometimes see is one strong personality will take over navigation for the whole team. And when I observe that, then I have to kind of figure, okay, how am I going to get this guy to just back up and like stop being the only person that's talking? And so you use some strategies and techniques, but it is kind of good sometimes if the more junior people are talking, so they're vocal, but it's not quite making enough sense for the driver to be able to like execute. So then you could kind of aggregate all the ideas and say, okay, if you do it in a great way, you say, hey, here's what I think you mean. Am I right to say that between all your ideas, this is what we want to do next? Got it. All right, now I can translate that into. So I want to be careful to say, you can't make that decision without validating it to the rest of the navigators and asking, okay, are we all in agreement that this is what we want to do? And letting them see models of that language is really important.
Okay, thanks. Well, let's see, we're just about at time now, so I think it's best if I, hang on a second, I'm just got to rearrange my screen so that I can come back to Zoom and take back the screen share. Thank you so much, Mike. This has been a really interesting talk, and everybody gets to clap now, whether we can hear you or not. I'm going to pull back screen share so that I can continue to introduce people. Hang on, just got to find it. There we go. All right. Okay. Up next is Lauren Carr speaking about the remote experiment. And she's from Hunter Industries. And Lauren, when you're ready to pull the screen share, go right ahead. As Lauren mentioned earlier, she's been working remote now for about, well, since March with her team after being a couple years there, working in person mobbing. And okay.
Hopefully everyone can see my screen now.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay, so hello everyone. Like Nancy mentioned before, my name is Lauren. I'm a software engineer at Hunter Industries, and I'm going to be talking about how our personal mobbing system adapted to going remote and how we treat it as one large experiment. So kind of a refresher, I was born and raised in San Diego, California. Got my degree in computer science from the California State University, San Marcos in San Diego. And I've been at Hunter Industries now for 2 years. I had started as an intern while I was still in college and was hired right after the internship as a full-time engineer. So what do I work on? Hunter Industries is an irrigation manufacturing company. So we make the black plastic that goes in your lawn or the golf courses or anywhere domestically, internationally that requires water. Our customers, again, range from the average homeowner to golf courses to even extremely large complexes. So we're dealing with these complex systems of sometimes thousands of sprinklers that we need to coordinate. And the software I work on is what makes all of that happen. So how do we mob? We mob 7 hours a day, every day. That includes meetings, that includes standard working on production code, with an hour of learning at the end of every day designated, because we believe in building the team from within and wanting to grow our skills. So that could be, you could learn anything that's related to what we're working on in production, or it could be any other skill that you're interested in that you want to bring to the team. Currently, there are 10 people on my team. So we have 3 mobs all working on the same project at the same time through all layers of the stack. So we handle front to back all of the features, and we are self-organized. We have all the job levels working together under a constant rotation. So you'll have associates and seniors, senior full stacks. Sometimes even our director, Chris Lucian, will come in and mob with us if he has free time, all working together. And we rotate our project specific every 2 weeks. So you'll be working with different people every 2 weeks. Or on a department level, we'll rotate projects every 2 years. So you get to kind of see everything that Hunter is doing the longer you stay, with free rotations at any time if you want to switch projects. We have an Agile retrospective at least once a week with the entire team on the project. We do hold sometimes like mini retros, as we call them, in between, like on breaks or as we feel the necessity, but at least once a week, we like to regroup and reflect on our work. And going into that a little bit more in detail, because I feel it is extremely critical to how the rest of this talk was even able to happen. These are the things we really value as part of our retro experience. So we are strong advocates of radical feedback or radical candor. you know, in order to work together well, because we are mobbing 7 hours a day, we need to be very comfortable with each other and be able to give each other that feedback so we can all grow and, you know, turn up the good, as Mike had mentioned before. We assume good intent. So, you know, we're all there for a shared purpose. We all want to work together. We assume no one is doing anything maliciously. It is all with the positive intent to make our work better. And so anything that is said as radical feedback should be taken, you know, in a positive light. We believe in making smart action items. So as results of our experiments, we want them to be easy to measure, you know, make them actionable, something that we can come back the next week and be able to reflect on. Everyone in the team gets a chance to facilitate. So we are self-organized. So we go through a rotation of every person on the team gets to flex that facilitator muscle and practice leading those kind of meetings, which can be nerve-wracking for some and quite easy for others. But in that way, we all share that skill set. And the format of the retro is up to the facilitator of that week. So sometimes we can fall into a rut of just doing like a happy, sad retro or, you know, whatever different types. So we like to shake it up and keep everyone engaged in that way. So now, where did we mob when we were in office? So all mobs were in the same open room with a self-organized freeform concept. Everything was on wheels, so we could change it at a moment's notice if we felt like something wasn't working. And there were 3 other project mobs on either side of us with sound blocking walls that were also on wheels. So if we had a meeting or another team had a meeting, we could kind of collapse in the walls to make it a little bit quieter. So you can imagine how loud that room would get with, you know, 30 developers all talking. On the left, it was a very crude diagram of kind of what it looked like in the office space. So we had 3 to 4 mobbers per station. We had 2 very large 80-inch monitors, or TVs really, and hardware surrounding us with a shared space in the center in case we needed to, you know, go off and use our laptops and there wasn't enough space on the table, anything like that. So what happens when we take this kind of complex system home, right? There's going to be a lot of changes because we go from a system where you can see on the left where you could turn around and talk to someone immediately. You could ask questions just into the open space as soon as they came up, and you could hear what other people were doing all the time. So, you know, if something, you know, had come up that you were curious about or you felt you had something to inject in, you could. How do you take that online and still keep this sort of effective system of creating software that we were doing? So we had to create up a new system. And unfortunately, there were some sacrifices. So our technical access was literally cut in half. So we only went down to our 1 desk at home. We went to only 1 monitor. All of our systems were taken to our internal department's like server room. And so we were able to get really fast internet, but we lost an extra screen, which was way more detrimental than we thought it would be. And now everyone was dependent on their own personal systems being able to perform for mobbing. So our own personal internets and our computers, which at the beginning of this whole thing were not very great to start. And we were working on getting new laptops, and we did finally get them, you know, and made a difference, but if only it was a little sooner. And we had to learn a bunch of new technologies. So for us personally, as a quick overview, we are using AnyDesk or TeamViewer to log into the machines remotely. So we're still all working on the same machine at the same time, and all of our code stays on those secure machines. So we don't have any, you know, NDA issues or leakage of production code on our personal machines. And a lot of our communications are handled through just the Microsoft Office 365 suite of applications. So like Microsoft Teams, stuff like that we had before, but wasn't as necessary when we were all together in office. And now going remote, we definitely had to adapt to learn that quickly. And now there was no easily shared space for large hardware. So if we're a sprinkler and controller production company and we need to work with those controllers to make the software, We had a rack of controllers in the office that we could go and reference and use for any manual tests that we wanted to do that were not available to us anymore. So we had to figure out tooling or ways that we could share that technology and have people bring that home with them and set it up in their house to keep that sort of technical access available while everyone is still dealing with their own technical issues of even the internet. So that was really fun. But the tech problem wasn't actually the worst one. As we started going remote and a couple months passed, we realized that there was actually a bigger underlying problem. You know, why were we failing any communications, right? We were having long silences in meetings. There was long delays in answering different questions. We would hesitate to turn to another group and ask a question, even if it was a very simple, quick answer. There was less awareness of what other teams were doing, and there was less engagement while we were working on a smaller screen and in our own personal environments with all the distractions that come with 2020. So we weren't communicating effectively at all, and that was detrimental to our work. And what we realized is we had actually overestimated our ability to communicate, right? We didn't realize that our ability to communicate effectively wasn't a result of our personal skills or our interpersonal relationships, but it was somewhat a result of our environment, right? So you isolate everyone and all of a sudden the entire dynamic has changed. So for this talk, there's many experiments that we went through in the last 8 months, but I'm going to focus on just a single string of experiments and how those all chained together to produce what outcome we had. Bear in mind, this works for us because of those things I talked about before in how we retro. And I believe without them, I don't think we would have gotten to such an understanding that we did or the result that we did. But first, at the beginning of all of this, we started to notice those communication gaps within and without the group. Something I like to call silence silos, where you have this really long string of silence and then there's always the one or two people that will always interject into it. As a result of that, we started to realize that we had neglected aspects of our project and our training that would possibly have caused these silos. And as a result of even researching that a little bit more, we realized that face-to-face contact became more important than ever. We are huge advocates at Hunter for if a meeting can happen, it should be face-to-face because that makes communication a lot smoother and it makes mutual understanding happen quicker. But with remote, we had lost that. So that's a key piece we were missing. So starting at the silence silos, the reason we came to realize this was happening is that we couldn't, like I said, we couldn't turn around and listen to other mobs anymore. We didn't realize how critical that was or how often we were actually doing that without realizing it. Isolating every mob led to less overall communication, and we only retroed once a week. So during those retros, we don't want to discuss technical matters. We're trying to build ourselves up as a team and build our communication. But this hurt when we were talking to our product owner about where we were in the code and moving the product forward. And so there was only a few people with information and the rest would stay silent. So you have this stagnated context sharing that we were missing. So what did we experiment on with this? We tried several things. There's more to this list than even this, but these are just a few of the key examples. We tried designated speakers in meetings. We're human though, and that's really easy to forget in the moment. If you designate it at the end of the day, you log off, you go eat dinner, you go play some video games or watch a movie, and you wake up and you're like, oh my gosh, I was supposed to kind of prep what we were talking about, and leads to just a little bit more silence and that awkwardness. So we tried having 2 daily stand-ups every day so that we could tell the other teams kind of where we were, what was going on, so that anyone could help pick up at any moment. But that became one too many stand-ups for us. Every 4 hours, there's not a lot that we could get done in the production code that is monumental enough to really have a strong update. And so we limited to just 1 in the morning, and that seems to actually be working for us very well. And we've invited the product owner to those meetings as well so that he can kind of get a feel for our process at the same time. But something we noticed and we wanted to ideate more on was switching more often to see more code, right? So we were switching every 2 weeks. So what if we switched every week? What if we just kept the rotation so you could see all different features at once? But we noticed that that was really hard to gain context quickly and worked effectively, because it took you 2 to 3 days to even gain context of what you were working on, what was going on. And then you only had 2 more days to work and then you were gone, right? So how could we make that even better? And that's when we realized there was code neglect, that we had old parts of our code that no one had touched in a very long time, if ever, right? Because we rotate so often and people rotate off the project after 2 years. I think everyone on the project now that I'm currently working on wasn't there when it was first created or when even some of the most key pieces were created. So that was very difficult to try and gain context on things no one remembers. People who were joining the team were not trained effectively to work on the team. So we had kind of fallen lackluster on training about the architecture, training about even just here's the meetings we have and why we have them. So new people that joined the team or switched onto the team were kind of feeling lost and feeling like they couldn't contribute very quickly, at least in that sense. As well as the frequent switching started to make it obvious where knowledge gaps were purely in technical coding skills in old and new practices. With all the different languages that we use, since we do the whole stack front to back, there's a lot there to learn, and we could kind of tell where people were feeling like they were lacking. So as a result of this, we experimented further. We tried doing a refactoring day to work on upgrading those old pieces of code that no one's touched in a very long time to new practices so that it was easier to work with. But it became really hard to figure out how to refactor out those obelisk pieces while still working on features that our product owner wanted. So we are currently trying to do more isolated, smaller refactorings so we can get those small victories out and still feel good that we're moving code across while producing. So that's still in progress. Not sure how that's going quite yet. We worked on training resources for the team to get familiar with the project and the different languages, and that seemed to be very successful. We have a strong belief in using checklists, so we don't have to remember everything. And so when new people come onto the team, or if we need to get refamiliar with something, we have the resources available now. But through our radical candor and through just talking through all these things, we started to realize that there was actually a problem with engagement within the team. And I think that's a common problem that happens in mob programming. And we thought when we were in office, that was a lot better. But now that we've gone remote, we almost had restarted over again of how to make people engaged or interested in the code at all. So we realized that we were just talking to circles on a screen, right? We didn't have that person that we could make eye contact with and, you know, really feel their emotion and get that energy flowing throughout the team. And so engagement was very low. You know, when you're in the office, you're surrounded with people and hardware and it's coding all the time. But now that we're at home and everything that's happened this year, you know, people are distracted or there's other things kind of weighing on people's mind. And so it became hard to communicate effectively without seeing another person's expressions, right? We assume good intent and we assume radical candor comes from a positive place. But there are sometimes things missed in the insinuations in someone's expression or the insinuations in their voice are misunderstood. So how are we going to solve this problem? Well, it's pretty simple, right? We just turn our cameras on. It didn't occur to us at first of, you know, actually doing that. I think there was kind of a strangeness of inviting people kind of into your home in a way by turning your camera on and seeing all of that. There's a vulnerability to it. So we started doing it just during retros, right? We're talking about these more personal problems. So we wanted to have that personal interaction while we were doing it. And that's worked really well. And that's become something that we've agreed to keep permanently. We're also currently conducting a survey to measure the levels of engagement within a smaller mob. So, you know, with all the teams being very isolated and it's really hard to when you're not in the moment, reflect on your day and what you've been doing. I'm currently conducting a survey where, every day people log onto that survey and put in their entry for the day of how engaged they felt and how engaged they felt like the whole team was. And we'll compare those results and see if we can find anything interesting in terms of, personal experience on the team. New retro formats have been introduced. So like I said before, it's up to the facilitator what kind of format they want to do. And so everyone's been experimenting with finding new formats and doing that kind of research, which has been really fun. And we advocate for group learning sessions. So we have the extra hour at the end of the day for our own personal learning time, but we are starting to encourage doing more group ones where if people have similar goals that they're trying to reach, they do it together. So mobbing even more than we already were. So what did all of this help us discover in the end, right? We got from experimenting with team switching to just turning on your camera. Well, what we learned from that is that failures lead to the underlying problem in a team, right? We had a lot of different successes, but it was really our failures that showed us what was it that we needed to start working on first before we can even think about tackling the larger problem, right? And so through the past 8 months now, even though it feels like it's been 2 months, I don't know why it feels like it's going so fast. There are 3 big things that I've kind of learned as a developer that I think a lot of teams could benefit from. So something that seems like a large and complex problem sometimes calls for the simplest step toward a solution. And this can work in code and outside of code. So if you're trying to tackle some large problem, you have no idea where to start, really boil down to the smallest thing you can do that you feel like would make an impact, and just keep experimenting on it, right? And secondly, fail often. Fail fast, fail often, because that's where you'll find the things you need to work on. That's how you'll build and learn as a team. And that way you can turn up the good and turn down the bad on all the things that you do. And the largest message I think that this whole conference, this whole meeting says, and you'll hear about mob programming a lot, is that it is always an experiment. It will never stop changing. It's different for every single team, every single person. Emily and Mike had iterated that on their talks, that it is constantly updating. And, you got to find out what works for you and for your team. And if it's not mob programming, maybe it's some version of it that you create and you share with the rest of the world, and we can all learn from that too. So that's all I have in terms of slides. And I encourage lots of questions. I love doing questions. So.
Okay, thank you. We do have questions, Lauren. First one is from Thomas. Were the training materials also read and watched within the mob?
Yes, so all the training materials were, ironically enough, mobbed. So we all worked together on creating those materials based on our experience. So we have an interesting system of when someone comes onto the team, we kind of want to do it in a slow manner so it doesn't feel so overwhelming. And that changes project to project depending on how the people feel like it would become the most comfortable. So in our team, for instance, we have a buddy system. So a person who's been on the team the least amount of time, but at least 6 months, is that person's buddy and will help them with when they have questions, giving them those materials, helping them get comfortable on the team. The reason we just needed those materials is because no one can remember everything. And we were finding a lot of people were trying to keep context in their head. And it's just too exhausting, especially now with going remote. There's so many other things to manage. So we advocated for that checklist just to make it a lot easier to reference and to make our mental load a lot lighter as well.
Okay. I'll just remark too that I really enjoyed your insights about the all the subtle differences that came, from a change in environment. I have another question here from Bob, and he's asking about the makeup of the team. And he asks, 10 people split into 3 smaller mobs with some flow between them, or was it 3 of 10-person mobs?
10 people split into 3 mobs.
Okay.
So 3 to 4 people on each, depending on attendance and who was there.
Okay. Let's see, moving along. Another one from Bob. He said he's so happy that you discovered the value of always on camera, even when stepping away. Mic muted, camera on. Your team members seeing an empty chair is unambiguous. Okay, so it's just a comment, I guess. Robert asks, Lauren, I was surprised about the weekly retro. I had the impression that you do daily retros or even faster, like after every full rotation.
Yeah, so for our team, because and this was even in office, we had the same exact format, and this is something we kept as we went remote. We do a full formal retro once a week. So it's about an hour, hour and a half where we can have some cross-team conversations. We have found, just for us personally, that doing a retro every single day in a full formal format is a little too much. We prefer kind of doing like check-ins or mini retros as we need them throughout the day. And I think it's just because we've gotten to a comfortable place as a team and we've all been mobbing for such a long time that we don't need to have those check-ins as often. But that can range from day to day, right? If we have someone that's new on the team, sometimes we'll retro more throughout the day to make sure that they feel comfortable and that, you know, they're integrating into the team well. So I think we've just gotten to a comfortable point of ad hoc retros when we need it, because we can gauge if things are going well based on how we've done in the past.
Okay, and on this same topic, here's a comment that's come in from Woody Zool, and he said, we did daily and even more frequent retros when I worked at Hunter. I know of at least one team there that does more than one a day. So just a comment there. Rochelle asks, do all mobsters try to read the document/screen at the same time?
Yes, so we are all sharing, since it is the same computer and one monitor and we're using AnyDesk to remote into that machine. Okay. Everyone's on the same screen at the same time. We do have our personal computers that we can do research off to the side, which has been not a big change since we went remote. We already had that before, but we still try to do research even together as a mob so we can learn it all together and see what everyone's talking about. But yeah, everyone's cursors, everyone's keyboard is hooked up to the same machine at the same time. So we're not having to do any sort of pushing or pulling when we switch drivers and navigators. You know, I think like Mike had mentioned before about how you can switch the navigator. It being the next person on the timer is exactly what we do. So like my team, for instance, is 3-minute rotations. So I'm only ever off the keyboard for 6 minutes. And in that time, I'm you know, navigating with the formal navigator. I think the role is called, oh man, what is it? Rear Admiral, there it is. So it's basically, I was like, oh, I can't remember. Yeah, the Rear Admiral of, you know, helping the navigator to develop these ideas before they go through the keyboard.
Okay, well, Lauren, we're a minute or so past time, but I tell you what, my closing remarks are very brief, and I want to give you one last question here. This comes from Hugo, and I think it's a great question. Would you rather work remotely now that you have experienced both ways of working?
Oh, that's a tough one. Oh man, that's really tough because, so a tiny bit of background on Hunter is remote wasn't really an option before. Right. We were trying to, because we are a manufacturing company, we were trying to make it fair between all levels. So engineering, us, the manufacturing floor, you know, we all wanted to be on campus because then there's not, you know, unequalness in treatment of we can work at home and other people can't. And COVID kind of just made that necessity. I'm split. I don't miss my commute, but I do kind of miss seeing everyone and being in that energy. That you can't quite get as much when you're on a screen. So I don't know. I'm torn. I guess I
Okay.
like remote because it's new and it's fun, and I think it's going to be an ongoing practice for a while. Like who knows how long now. But no, I miss my fellow mobbers as well. So it's a tough one.
That's a tough one. All right, we'll have to leave it there. Okay, so we're at this point in our schedule. I just have a few closing remarks. I want to say a big thank you to our volunteers at Agile New England. I want to thank David for being Zoom host, and Ethan for funneling the questions, and Danny and Peter for being chat monitors. And we have a whole group of other volunteers who put together the program and marketing and everything else at Agile New England. We have lists of some of that in our website here at agilenewengland.org. Just a few brief announcements. We would love to have your feedback. Feedback from our June event helped us to put this one together. We have an exit poll for you. You might want to, the bit.ly map here link is an easier one to remember, and our chat monitors should be poking that into the chat screen to make it more convenient for you right now. I said earlier that I'd mention a way for us to continue talking with you all for some of the questions that we didn't have time for. We do have a public Slack group here at Agile New England. Here's the link to it on this screen. And within that, first of all, you don't have to be a member of Agile New England to join the public Slack. Once you join that, you can come to the channel that's called Mob Programming. And I'm on that. Woody Zool is on it. I've given our speakers an invitation to join that too. So, you know, we can have some discussion there over the next few days if you like. And let's see, we are just about done. So if you were planning to save the chat log, now is a good time to do that. And this is it. This is the end of our program today. Thank you very much for attending. Hope everybody enjoyed it. I hope you got lots of new answers for your questions. And keep an eye on our website. We'll let you know when we're doing our next conference or our next online gathering. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.